This hovercraft is operating in Canada, breaking up ice floes. Once finished with this job, it can go on to fill a myriad of essential tasks. In hot climates of the tropics or in the icy winds of the Arctic North, the hovercraft has put in over 30 years of service. In that short time span, it's proven itself an extraordinarily useful machine. But what exactly is a hovercraft, and just where did it come from? Perhaps it's easier to say what a hovercraft isn't. This is the Harrier, an airplane that not only flies at supersonic speeds, but one that can also take off or land vertically. By directing jet thrust downward, this aircraft has mastered the art of hovering. Nevertheless, it is not a hovercraft. Another machine that dabbled into melding the capabilities of airplane and helicopter was called the tilt rotor. It used engines on the end of its wing that swiveled from the vertical to horizontal position. Another concept along these lines was the tilt wing. Its entire wing rotated, enabling it to hover or level its wing and fly on like any other aircraft. Two planes were developed that were among the first to take off vertically. Neither entered active service, but they did serve to further the technology. Another breakthrough occurred when manufacturers used big scoops to duct propeller thrust downward, giving this plane added lift. Though it never quite hovered, it did succeed in taking off in very short distances. One of the first endeavors that really could hover was the Curtiss flying platform. Although its directional control was less than perfect, the platform's 4 rotors did manage to lift it off the ground and keep it in the air. Curtiss then went on to make a 4-engine tilt-rotor aircraft that was good at hovering, but not much else. All of these efforts fell short in one crucial aspect. They used conventional propellers. Propellers that were really designed to pull the vehicle through the air, not to simply lift it off the ground. Finally, engineers got onto the right track and began to employ fans to take on the lifting part of the job while leaving jets to the task of propelling the machine. The Ryan experimental aircraft put this idea to the test. But although it flew and hovered reasonably well, engines took up nearly all of the available space on the vehicle. On the other hand, the Bell X-22 engines were pushed out far to the sides, leaving the fuselage relatively open to other uses. Like many early configurations, it used large propellers. But by placing the props inside ungainly tunnels, their thrust was finally maximized. This concept was further refined by the Canadian Avrocar. Initially intended as a supersonic fighter, this precursor to the modern hovercraft used a large multi-bladed fan that's thrust was maximized through a central tunnel and then directed through a complex series of vents. Real progress was now being made, and with the inception of the Piasecki Air Jeep, the age of the modern hovercraft had almost arrived. From the start, it was fairly evident that this new technology, geared more toward hovering than flying, would have many practical uses. In the race to develop the fan vehicle, one that could travel just over the surface of the ground, 3 basic approaches gained prominence. The first was the plenum chamber, an inverted chamber with a hole in the top and solid sides. The second was the annular jet system, which directed the airflow toward the center of the machine to limit the dissipation of thrust. But the third method used an extra ingredient, and in the end, this single innovation would set the pattern for most modern air cushion vehicles. On August 3rd, 1953, Charles J. Fletcher, a Navy lieutenant commander, introduced this third ingredient in the first known design of a true hovercraft. Fletcher found that by trapping the air under his vehicle with an inflatable rubber skirt, he could maximize the generated thrust and create a more stable platform. Fletcher submitted his idea to the U.S. Army, but was denied a patent because of secrecy interests. It wasn't until 1993 that he received legal credit for the invention. The British also developed a prototype called the SRN-1, using Fletcher's basic design elements of a ducted fan to generate thrust, a skirt to contain it, and modest devices for propulsion and steering. Suddenly, a new product had been invented. Manufacturers were quick to realize its potential. Commercial models were tested and offered to the public. This is an early Curtiss design. There was a large ducted fan in the rear that pushed air through the funnel at the top. Most of the airstream was converted into thrust, which was maximized by the trapping effect of the skirt. Some of the thrust was channeled into the large vents or gills at the side of the hovercraft, which were opened and adjusted to give the pilot some degree of directional control. On land or sea, basic experimental designs like this made the hovercraft a more practical and useful machine. One of the first things these tests showed was that the hovercraft was a viable invention. On top of that, it looked like a lot of fun to fly. There were problems to overcome. To begin with, the test models demonstrated that there was a lot of vibration generated by the large fan or turbine. And sitting so close to this loud, vibrating turbine was anything but comfortable. Also, the early control systems used a considerable amount of valuable thrust every time they were engaged. But the technology was new, and in the beginning only had to show promise. The next step was to find a niche in the marketplace.